So I'm Kate Presland. I'm the Programme Manager for Innovative Farmers. And what is Innovative Farmers? Well, we have this concept of field labs, which are peer-to-peer learning and experimentation. It's about farmers and producers setting the priorities of what they want to study, research and experiment, and they're supported by respected researchers around the UK. It's all the top agri research institutions that we have in, here. And the crucial part is they're practical, they're intuitive, and they're on farm. You have multiple trialists most of the time, and so those farmers, although the experiments are more noisy because you've got lots of variation between farms, they're much more real. They're much more exciting. You're sharing a bit of risk, and if it didn't work for you, but it worked for 3 of your neighbours, well, it's a lot more interesting to understand why that happened and what were the drivers. Whereas if you were experimenting on your own, it's much harder to try and determine what might have been the cause of a failure or a success. And so you're sharing that risk in your investment, and you're amplifying that learning amongst your peers, which the farmers that we work with really enjoy and respond very well to that. And there's lots of ideas that are bounced around. And the programme also has a small grant scheme deliberately capped to just up to £10,000 per field lab that the groups can apply for. And that's incredibly practical pots of money that might buy some kits, might buy some tests, but it doesn't get sort of swallowed up in university overheads. It's really practical money that means a trial can get off the ground very quickly. There's low paperwork, and we can respond very quickly to all the different kinds of experiments that the farmers are interested in doing. Now, it's a partnership. It's led by the Soil Association, working really closely with the Organic Research Centre, of which Dominic, our second speaker today, is a researcher from that. Innovation for Agriculture, Linking Environment and Farming, shortened to LEAF, and Waitrose Duchy Organic. The Prince of Wales Charitable Fund has been our principal funder from the start, funded in part by the sales of Duchy Organic products in Waitrose. So that's the connection of the partnership that we have there. Now, we're going to be talking about 3 field labs today, but we've got a few other field labs that have been talked about in our Field Lab Journal, which is hot off the press in time for Oxford Real Farming Conference. And our comms manager, Dan, is going to post the link in the chat box. So please do have a look at that. It's really interesting. It gives you loads of detail about what some of the field labs have been up to. And also, please do check out our Twitter feed, where we post up lots of information about different field labs, and our website, with the links are all on this page here. So as I said before, we've got 3 different speakers from 3 different field lab projects. Oh, my apologies, Andrew, I've missed off your organisation there. We've got Andrew, who's going to talk to us about trap crops that have been used in potato growing to try and tackle potato cyst nematode. We've got Dominic from the Organic Research Centre, who's been doing huge amounts of work on different winter wheat varieties, and Andy from Abbey Home Farm, who has been doing a lot of work around using buckwheat for cooch control. Now, we've got a lot of people in this session, which is fantastic, a huge number of people joining this session today, and we really want to try and answer lots of questions. And so please, could we use this system called Mentimeter? Now, you just go to menti.com and you add in that code, and it will bring up this page showing you where you can log your questions for the panelists as we go through, because we only have 60 minutes, and I think it could get quite unwieldy in the chat section if all the questions are hiding in there. It would be wonderful in the chat section if you write who you are and what organisation you're from. But when you go to Mentimeter, it will ask you as your first question, where in the world are you joining us from today? Because the Oxford Real Farming Conference is a global one this year, which is fantastic. So we'd be really interested to see where everybody's from. So without further ado, it'd be really good to just go onto there, and it will start to populate a word cloud showing where everybody's from today, which would be great. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to our first speaker, Andrew, who's going to talk us through establishing potato cyst nematode trap crops and the trap crops that they've used in the trial. And so, Andrew, if you could get started on that, are you ready to go?
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Please let me know when you want to switch sides. Thanks very much.
Hello, everybody. I'm Andrew Webster, farmer from Lancashire. Now, it says Shropshire discussion group. I got involved through knowing Matt Black at Arpadam University, been to meetings, Andrew Wade and Ivan Grove. So they knew who I was, what was interested in. And over about 12 months ago, I was asked to help come into the discussion with them because what works in one area might not work in another. So that's how we got involved with it. So PCN, potato nematode, can take 80% of your yield. It's a nematode that's in the ground, attacks the roots, and can devastate yields. Have the next slide, please, Kate. So what's happening with potato nematode? Well, on the top of the screen there, 2000, there's 87%, no, 67% was pallida, 8% Ristokensis, some mixed, and that was about it. By 2016, pallida had become a more dominant species. It is hard to control. There is only one variety in the AHDB list with a score of 5 or greater for pallida, and that's a potato variety called Innovator. That is mostly used for the McCain, the chip side. We are growing crisping potatoes, so we can't, that variety doesn't work for us. There is only 4 varieties in the top 50 that has got resistance to pallida. So we're on a hard battle to start with. So as farmers, I'm not organic, but what we are doing is we're looking at the organic side and other sides and going, what else can we do? Well, I don't want to be reaching for the can first. I want anything else I can do to prioritize. So how can we reduce PCM levels? Longer rotations between crops, 1 in 7, 1 in 8. So, some are a lot closer than that. I try to keep it as long as we can. But what we're also doing in the bottom 2 slides are, that is oil radish, overwintered as a cover crop, sown in September, flailed under and worked in the spring to go into potatoes. They were using multi-purpose oil radishes, which are giving glycosinolates out through the roots, and then when we incorporate them, giving glycosinolates to control the PCN in the field once they're chopped in. So, but that can only be at best somewhere in trials 49 to 60% efficient. So it's not brilliant, but is there anything else out there? Like catch crops are used in Shropshire quite a lot, where they sow mustard, and they're sowing that after early carrots, winter barley, stuff like that, where they can get it in June, end of June, July time, get a nice big mustard crop and biofumigate. That's another way of doing it, but 60% efficient. So, can the next slide, please, Kate? So, the project, where we wanted to know, we've learned about trap crops when we was over in Holland. We've known about them for quite a few years. So we started asking questions about trap crops, and a lot of work we was hearing about 75, 80% efficiency. And a trap crop is where we grew up, where you put in a solarium, which is the potato variety, potato family. Find a host from the same solarium family, which is resistant to PCN. And this is where Cyst and Scabron we've found will do it. So we started asking questions. So can we sow Cyst and Scabron effectively grown as a late or very late. So what we wanted to do was, can we put them in as a catch crop situation? So can we sow it end of June or into July? And what that will do is we sow the plants, sow the seeds, they grow, and the PCN, the plants put pheromone out, the PCN hatches, but it can't carry on its life cycle because it's resistant to it. So that will reduce the PCN. So wanted to know about the sowing dates. There was also some research done. Sowing depth is crucial. So they set some parameters out, and that's what we did do. So, but can scabron show growth potential in Shropshire and Ormskirk? Now, scabron is a leafy plant. Sissin is a bit like a really thorny rose. It really is. Sissin is, it's part of the sticky nightshade family, and you won't want to walk through it. So there was a question that was asked, and can we go ahead and do it? So can the next slide, please, Kate? So this is the trial site at Clayton in Shropshire. They were sowing it on the 25th of July. There is a slight mistake on the right at the top. It was after whole crop rye, what was going to an AD plant. So the plots were set out 4 meters wide, 15 meters long, and between each site, each plot, there was an 8 meter turnaround point. So we weren't turning on the next plot. We had a track between where we could run onto. The Shropshire sites, which were Clayton, Tiverton and Lilyhurst, they all use the same setup, which was a Lemke solitaire drill combination. So that's what they used down there, because that's what one of the farmers had. Up here, we used a Vertistead rapid drill, and we were sowing a few days later than what they were. So that's what the plots were. And then you can see there was the August next sowing plot further on. The 3 sites in Shropshire, Clayton was a sandy loam. Tiverton was a loamy sand. Lilyhurst was more heavy. It was a clay loam. And I'll come to that in a bit. And then up in Ormskirk, our site was a sandy loam. So all the Shropshire sites were sown near enough together, and we was different dates. Like I think the Tiverton site was after carrots. There was after different crops. So we had to, but it was all trying to get them in, to get them established. Can the next slide, please, Kate? So this is what happened in Lancashire. So, yeah, the plot on the left-hand side is what was sown on the 8th of July. The plot on the right, which isn't a lot there, sown on the 7th of August. There is a 4 meter strip through the middle, and the rest of around the rest of the field, the 10 acre site there, which was sown with oil radish and mustard. That's what that strip is down the middle. If you're sharp-eyed viewers, you'll be able to see a Sissin scabron plant about a third way up on the left-hand side, part way in. That is one plant there. We didn't have a good germination here. Now, there was a lot of factors that we could put into it. We do not know, but some worked. The scabron, we had patches of good scabron, but not enough to justify the trap crop. So I say one of the things, rainfall after the sowing. The day after the sowing, well, the 2 days after the sowing in Lancashire on the first plot, we had 2 days of 10mm of heavy rain. Whether that had an effect on it, we do not know. But the far right hand side, not a lot coming. That was the odd plant. It weren't brilliant. So it's one of them. It's more work, but it answered the question. Was it too late? Yes. Go the next slide, please, Kate.
You've got 2 minutes left then.
Yep. No. This is the Clayton site. The right-hand side of the screen is Scabron. It's Cyst, left-hand Scabron. That's a different site. That's the first sowing date. That was a brilliant site. It worked well. Where we quite got enough biomass, the figures will say it's all in the report that's been done later on. Some of the sites in Shropshire, they was the same. One of the sites weren't brilliant. After the sowing, they sowed on the 28th of July. On the 12th of August, 73mm rain. We think the rainfall is hammering the germination afterwards. Come the next slide, please, Kate. So we answered some of the questions. So can it be sown? Planting at Ormskirk at the late or very late date does not appear to have viable essentially. So it was a rainfall pattern. That's some of the results. There is a full dossier, I think it's 38 pages, that is coming out what's been done with this. And it answers questions, but it also opens a lot more questions. And I've opened this next year, we'll be able to answer some more of those. So can I have the next slide, please, Kate? So I'd like to say a big thank you to Innovative Farms, the project. It's done, it's the first time we've been involved in it. I also like to thank Ivan Grove. He's the one who's done all the work, Andrew Wade, Matt Back and Anne Stone, and the farmers involved in it, Neil Furness and Produce Solutions for supplying the seeds that we've used, because it's a project. I think we have work to do, but there's a lot of questions still to answer. So I'd like to say a big thank you, and if there's any questions later on, I'll try and answer them.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And you got us off to a cracking start there. So I'm going to use chair's privilege here and take a question for you. But so this was the first time you have done a field lab, but am I right in thinking you said before that you're actually involved in quite a lot of trialling? How have you found trialling with other farmers? Obviously you had differences in the effects that you saw. So how did you find, was that quite helpful to see other sites and how they responded?
Yes, it was nice to go to meetings in Shropshire. It's social distancing, it's been hard work, but in the middle of a field, yeah, we've been able to do it. Yeah, it's been some nice discussions. I picked ideas up from down there. They are 57 miles straight south of us. So they see some problems, and sometimes you talk to farmers and ideas start to flow. And sometimes someone might say something, you think, hang on a minute, can I take that back to farm? And that's how it works. It's this interaction. And sometimes you've got to get out of your little hamster wheel of where you are to go distance to get the bit more knowledge and other ideas, rather than everyone looking over the fence and going,
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Becky is monitoring our Mentimeter for us, where questions are coming up. And I just wanted to quickly share, before we move on to Dominic, I just wanted to quickly share, people have been writing where they've come from in the world, in the country. So I'd really like to share that if possible. So let's see if I can make this work. Let's have a look here. So the word clouds coming up. And these are all the different places that people are coming from. So we've got Edinburgh and Devon and Shropshire. Have we got anywhere? Yeah, Wageningen, that's great. Budapest, fantastic. Well, if anybody that's joined us that missed the beginning intro, please do go to mentimeter.com and use the code. That's where you can log your questions to our speakers. What I didn't mention before, and it's really important, this is being recorded, but won't get shown. Won't be available for about a month, I think, by the time it all gets worked through with the number of sessions in the conference. So what we were planning to do is all the questions that can't be answered, which there undoubtedly will be some, we'd really like to follow up with the blog post to answer as many questions as possible between the speakers. So please do log any questions that you have, and if we don't get to them now, we will get to them later. So that would be fab. Please do log them on Mentimeter. So I'd like to hand over now to Dominic Amos, who's a researcher, crops researcher at the Organic Research Centre, who's been partners on field labs for a really long time. Dominic worked on lots of field labs. So Dominic, when you're ready, please do share your screen and start. You might be on mute, Dominic.
Sorry, can you hear me? Am I on?
Yes.
Hi, brilliant. Okay, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a bit about crop diversification in order to manage weeds today, using some examples from the field labs that we've been engaged with at the Organic Research Centre. So just by way of a quick introduction, not as a criticism, but just to start, I wanted to kind of challenge that idea around fighting weeds and pests. And using that sort of language of war, where really in agroecology, we're working with nature and we're trying to harness some of that biodiversity that we find on organic farms, in order to provide those ecosystem services that we're looking for, of which weed control and pest control are some. So yeah, the three field labs that I'm going to draw upon as examples, and hopefully as kind of inspiration as well for farmers to go out and try utilising and implementing diversity on farm for weed control, are the wheat varieties field lab, intercropping field lab, and the living mulch field lab, which also had its own session at Oxford Real Farming Conference. And I think everything's going to be on demand. Once that's available, yeah, I encourage you to go and watch the session on that. And then finally, I'm going to finish on a point about agroecology and knowledge production. Yeah, so to start with on the wheat varieties, so the field lab began really as a way to start testing and evaluating varieties under organic husbandry. We all know that modern varieties aren't bred for organic farming or low input farming, but as a kind of a bare minimum, we should be testing them under organic farming to provide more information for organic farmers. Now, when we're talking about kind of weed competition and weed suppression, weed tolerance, these are two well-defined things. And these field labs, the plot trial wasn't specifically set up to look at those. So when we're talking about weed suppression, that would be the crop kind of being able to reduce the fitness of weeds, and tolerance would be where the crop's able to reach kind of yield potential despite weeds, even in higher kind of weed abundance. But what we find time and time again is that the characteristic of ground cover, which is made up by a number of traits, seem very important in terms of helping to control and manage weeds. And there's a photo illustrating that point with a kind of taller, more heritage phenotype crop on the right, able to better suppress weeds, and some data we collect around stem extension on the farms that shows a relationship between that ground cover early on and then the weed cover flowering. And sure, we do find the taller crops at flowering have lower weed covering. There's kind of heritage varieties like Maris Widgeon or the ORC Wakelands population. Another nice result that we've been finding on the farm is that actually a diversity of weed species reduces dominance and therefore hopefully competition. So actually the weed community is almost managing itself in a sense. So a bit more quickly on competitive ability and which traits are important. And we again kind of started out thinking about an organic idiotype, and the truth be told, all these traits can be important, and some may be important in different environments and under different circumstances and with different weed communities. And I've listed there some of the varieties that show some of these traits to a greater degree. Again, pointing to the fact that ground cover and estimating ground cover is a good way to get an idea around competitiveness of wheat and of other cereal species. So thinking about how to improve ground cover and maybe how to combine some of these traits, because maybe no particular one variety has all the traits you need, under variable and potentially unpredictable environments, would be to think about growing mixtures and increasing that kind of in-crop diversity. So there's just a couple of illustrative photos on the left there of two varieties and showing differences in ground cover, and on the right maybe not as clear as the photo before, where with two different varieties you can see kind of suppression of weeds, particularly the poppies and some charlock in there, I think, on the right hand side of that fence post marker, to a line where the varieties change. Just the thought, this hasn't taken place in any of the field labs, but as another way to try to improve and increase ground cover, since we know that's a characteristic that can help control weeds. Cross drilling, whether you can see there with the app Canopio, which is a nice farmer friendly app you can use on your smartphone to take photos to estimate ground cover, just by cross drilling, how you can increase the ground cover early on, which is therefore giving you more competition against any germinating weeds. A little bit of theory around the ecological niche and how niche overlap creates competition and niche segregation creates complementarity, and it's that complementarity that we're trying to tap into maybe when selecting mixtures or selecting species for intercropping, for polyculture. And that diagram on the right there is a nice example to show what we're kind of talking about. So another field lab that colleagues have been involved in at the ORC is the intercropping field lab, and been looking at lots of different crop combinations. A classic example is wheat and beans. That's on a photo on the left there from one of the farms. So the farmer there was looking to combine wheat and beans to help improve weed suppression in a bean crop, and actually found in successive years that there was a 73% reduction in weed biomass, dry matter, from including wheat with the beans. And there's lots of examples from the literature and experimentation that show that we can get improved land use efficiency from growing these crops in combination, giving LERs above 1. And another project that's been run in collaboration with this is the Diversify project, and they've been looking, which is a European project. They've been looking at all sorts of cereal pulse combinations, plenty of which have been kind of designed to look at the service of weed control, and plenty of the data is showing that growing a cereal and a pulse in combination can help suppress weeds in comparison to the pulse monocrop. So just to advertise a conference coming up with the Diversify and Remix project that's going to be showcasing the results from that pan-European research project. I urge anyone who might be interested in intercropping and combining species to attend. It starts next week, and it looks like a fantastic agenda full of great inspiration, information on the latest research into intercropping for sustainability. Yeah, so the final field lab that I just wanted to briefly mention, as I said, it had its own ORFC session back on Thursday on the opening day, is around living mulch, and another aspect of intercropping, trying to originally undersowing clover into a crop to try and provide ground cover and competition to suppress weeds as a service crop, and as a move towards reducing and maybe even no-till organic and low input production. So some initial data from one of the trials does show that we're finding weed suppression or a lower weed ground cover from where the clover's growing compared to the controls. So the trials have a mulch plot where a cereal crop, in this case winter oats, has been direct drilled into an established clover stand, compared to a control crop of the kind of standard farm practice, which is usually involving either ploughing or kind of reduced non-inversion tillage. So another quick example, this one's about functional diversity and cover crop mixtures to enhance ecosystem services. So a colleague of mine was involved in some research over in Italy, and showed that actually if you're combining species in a cover crop mix, that can enhance biomass production and therefore weed suppression. And also not just that combining species, increasing diversity, enhance those services, but it was also about functional diversity. So, separating out crops into cereals, or to brassicas, or to different types of legume. So just to make a point about ecological intensification, back to my original point in the introduction, I'm trying to optimize these ecological processes that underlie production and harnessing the ecosystem services so that we're not so much fighting parts of the ecosystem, but certainly trying to avoid making enemies, and obviously trying to use diversity in that approach. So we can enhance ecosystem services, including weed suppression. And plants obviously are a renewable and sustainable source of weed control and also bring many other benefits. And just a final one about the merits and the benefits of on-farm research, particularly in terms of agroecology, which kind of eschews generic knowledge production, where as Andrew's already pointed out, running the trials in their own situation, under their own circumstance, under their own environment is really important. We know agroecology is knowledge intensive, and we know it's highly context specific. So it stands to reason, the most efficient way to help farmers to learn and to find solutions is to support them to carry out their own research on farm. And that's something that innovative farmers and other participatory farm research networks are delivering. And farmers definitely can be researchers, and it's about on-farm research as a kind of driver for the agroecological journey. And yeah, that's me. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dominic. If you want to unshare your screen. Now, Becky's been keeping an eye on the Menti questions coming in. And I wonder, Becky, have you got a question for Dominic that's come up that you could share with us, please?
Yep. So if you can hear me. So we have a few questions coming on Mentimeter. One of them is, how long is the crop left before drilling in the companion crop? And also maybe another one tied into this, how are you terminating the cover crop as well? So one for the buckwheat, one for the living mulch.
Sorry, Rebecca, I couldn't quite hear you.
Oh, sorry, could you not hear me? Oh.
It is a little quiet, Becky. If you could just repeat the question for Dominic and us all, please.
Okay, hopefully it will work this time. How long is the companion crop being left before drilling? Sorry, how long is the crop being left before drilling in the companion crop?
In which case, sorry?
I'm assuming, would that be for the buckwheat? Which one? What's that? It hasn't actually been specified for that.
You think it might be maybe the living mulch would make most sense?
Yeah, and then they've also asked how are you terminating cover crop as well. So yes, I'd assume for the living mulch.
Yeah, so for living mulch, so that was undersown. So a couple of the trials that have taken place have been set up successfully. The clovers have been undersown into a spring barley crop, a spring wheat crop, and also a winter wheat crop, and that was back in kind of March, April of 2020. And then following the harvest of those crops in kind of October, November 2020, the farmers involved have drilled either a winter oat crop or a winter rye crop into the established stand of clover. And the idea is not at this stage, so we're the second season into the trials, so there hasn't been any termination of the clover yet. And the idea, if it's going to be a long-term move towards kind of reducing tillage or even no tillage, that you know, the clover is going to stay in for kind of at least the medium term. Although one of the farmers taking part might still grow a lay, and therefore, yeah, would be terminating, you know, at some point once the cash cropping cycle is finished.
Okay, thanks very much, Dominic. I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and I think we best move on to our next and final speaker, Andy Dibbin from Abbey Home Farm, who's going to talk a little bit more from the farmer's perspective of the buckwheat trial, looking at the suppression of cooch. So, Andy, if you could share your screen and get started, that would be wonderful. Thank you. And can I just mention while you do that, I've seen on the chat some people with the delay being left in the lobby. I do apologise. I think there's a little bit of a delay with seeing when the lobby is there, but we'll try and move people in as quick as we can. So I do apologise for that. Thanks very much, Andy.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Andy Dibbin. I work at the organic farm shop, Abbey Home Farm, just outside Cirencester in Gloucestershire. We're a 660 hectare farm, certified organic for 30 years. I arrived here 6 years ago. I'm the head grower responsible for 6 hectares of horticultural cropping. We grow over 80 crop lines of fruit and veg on a field scale, market garden scale with protected cropping, and I'm helped by my fantastic team of apprentices. The farm's mission is to provide the local community with a full range of UK crops to eat 12 months of the year, all organically produced. We do dairy, meat, bread, vegetables, top fruit and soft fruit, all produced on site and sold through our farm shop. We reckon we currently feed about 200 families or 800 people, 1,000 people there or thereabouts, with all of their sort of weekly needs. That's me and where I come from. Innovative farmers and field lab trials I've been involved in for a few years now. I love them. It's farmer-led research. It's solutions to genuine agricultural challenges, focused on techniques and not products. And this solutions-based approach to research and development, it's about sustainable agriculture, not profit for big ag shareholders, which I'm passionate about. You know, it's farmers finding solutions to farmers' problems. So this particular trial I was involved with is looking at whether buckwheat can be used to control cooch grass. The world knows it needs to move to a food production system that does not rely on environmentally destructive chemicals. Farmers know a world without herbicide is potentially a world carpeted from wall to wall with creeping thistle, blackgrass, docks and cooch grass. Non-chemical soil-friendly techniques that have been field tested to find essentially solutions to pernicious weeds are critical. The future of agriculture, whether we call it organic, regenerative, agroecological, min-till, no-dig or vegan, whatever you want to call it, pernicious perennial weeds will be one of the biggest challenges for all of these approaches. So, sorry, Dominic, I got the word enemies in there. I will take that out. So cooch grass, twitch grass, quack grass, it's got many, many names. It's an age-old problem for farmers right since the beginning of farming, really, especially in the UK. And you've got to know what you're dealing with. So cooch grass, it's a rhizomatous plant, which means that it's reproducing all the time. It's not just setting seed seasonally. It's a phosphate accumulator, so it thrives in phosphate-poor environments. It's extremely drought and flood tolerant, can survive for 8 months without sunlight. So it's a hardcore survivor. Not many plants can survive 8 months without sunlight. It's allelopathic. This means it releases chemicals that inhibit plant growth, allowing it to outcompete plants around it. It's physically problematic for drilling crops, for weeding crops, and for mechanically harvesting crops. It can proliferate to problematic levels within a green manure system. Current proven control methods are chemical, i.e. Roundup, which potentially leads to ecosystem destruction and poisoning of workforce and consumers. We can deal with it with aggressive cultivations, so effective but weather dependent and damaging to soil structure. Pigs are also effective at dealing with it, but again, damaging to soil structure and a high management requirement if you're using them in a non-livestock environment. Buckwheat. So buckwheat is a fast-growing, non-leguminous cover crop. easily killed by frost or mechanical destruction. It's a phosphate scavenger, just like cooch. It's hugely effective at attracting pollinators and predatory insects. And it also, like cooch, can outcompete surrounding crops through shading, but more importantly, it also has an allelopathic effect from its root exudates. So the background to the trial was, for myself, I started work on this farm 6-7 years ago, and when I arrived, I inherited one very coochy field, which in the middle of it had a very obvious cooch-free patch of about 1 hectare. Looking into the records more closely, there'd been a crop of buckwheat growing there 2 years before, and it obviously had a significant effect on the cooch. Having spoken to the farm manager who does the arable, he'd observed similar results on cooch when attempting to grow buckwheat as a harvested crop to feed his chickens. No, scientifically recorded evidence, but plenty of circumstantial and anecdotal evidence. Cooch has been a problem on most veg farms that I've worked on, so I was very keen to investigate it with a slightly more structured trial. This is where the field labs come in. So there's various hypotheses of why buckwheat has an effect, okay? And these are some of them. No one quite knows why it has an effect on cooch. These are some of the possibilities. So buckwheat root exudates are known to be allelopathic. So is it that's holding the cooch back? Buckwheat casts deep shade. Cooch doesn't like deep shade, so it could be this deep shade that's affecting it. Buckwheat, just like cooch, is really good at scavenging phosphate. So is it that it's outcompeting the cooch for phosphate? It's also observed, and I got this off the farm manager on the arable side, that when you drill buckwheat, it tends to be drilled slightly later in the year because it requires a warmer soil. So is it this later cultivations in the year? Normally we sow buckwheat in May or in early June when the soils are a lot warmer. Is it this later ground prep that has the benefit effect in knocking the cooch back? Possibly all of them. So we were hoping to investigate these through the trial. The trial itself, so what we did is we identified the trial areas. I've got 2 separate field scale rotations, so we identified trial areas in both the rotations. The trial areas were split into 2, a control area and a buckwheat trial area. The buckwheat trial plot, this is how we ran that side of the trial. We did a pre-trial cooch assessment in the sort of late winter, early spring before we did any cultivations. We grew a crop of buckwheat. We cut it down after 6 weeks. We then incorporated it into the soil. We then allowed 3 weeks for the allelopathy to dissipate, and then we established a winter green manure. The following spring, we did a post-trial cooch assessment. On the control plot, we did all the same activities at the same time as the buckwheat trial plot, but we used our normal cooch control method that for me is essentially a fallow period called a bastard fallow, where you just continuously cultivate the soil every sort of 3 to 4 weeks. Every time you see the cooch kind of wake up after a cultivation, you knock it back again with a cultivation. And then again, we established a winter green manure crop after that at the same time as the buckwheat trial plot. And then we did a post-trial cooch assessment the following spring. The pre-trial cooch assessment, we looked at 3 different ways of doing this. The scientific way was to do essentially like soil testing. We dug soil pits in the field. We took out cooch rhizome, we cleaned it off, and then we weighed it. We also did photographic demonstration of cooch burden, like the photo on the screen here now. And then we also did a farmer scoring of burden out of 10. Now, for myself, I didn't get on too well with the sampling and weighing of cooch. I found it quite fussy, finding enough time to do it when the weather window was just sort of begging for me to get on with some ground prep. I actually found the photographic demonstration and the farmer scoring of the burden a much easier farmer way of doing it. The other problem with sampling the weight of the rhizome is, if you can see on the photo, cooch tends to be patchy throughout a field. It doesn't tend to be the same coverage across the field. So sometimes the random sampling technique wasn't truly showing up the burden in the field. So the realities of agricultural trials. Just growing crops in current extreme weather patterns is hard enough. Trying to replicate trial conditions in successive years is incredibly hard. We carried out these trials in 2017, 2018, 19 and 20. Spring droughts during that period have become more and more severe and have had an impact on the trials. 2017 produced no conclusive results as buckwheat establishment was very poor. 2018, hampered by drought, but reduced area trial plot was eventually established. After learning valuable lessons in how to effectively establish a crop of buckwheat in challenging conditions and refining my approach, we effectively carried out in 2019 and 20 some good trials, actually, and good results. The following is a combination of results and observations from all of the successful trial years. So the trial itself, 2 separate 1 hectare trial plots in separate rotations. Plots were split into trial and control areas. Plot 1 was at the beginning of a 6-year rotation of field scale vegetables, after a main crop carrots and before a 2-year fertility lay. Plot 2 was after a brassica crop and before main crop onions. Onions historically struggle with cooch burden because they cast no shade at all. Pre-trial cooch assessment carried out with photos and scoring methods. Plot 1 scored as 8 out of 10. Plot 2 scored as 6 out of 10. Whole of both trial areas were ploughed mid-May at a depth of 20 centimetres. Both areas were power harrowed 2 weeks later. Then buckwheat broadcast at a rate of 70 kilos per hectare onto trial areas, lightly chain harrowed and rolled in. Buckwheat was watered in with boom irrigator with a ½ inch of water, and the crop was grown for 6 weeks. At 6 weeks, we destroyed the crop of buckwheat with a flail mower. We then rotivated at a depth of 20 centimetres to incorporate the buckwheat into the soil, and we then rolled it in. We then left a gap of 3 weeks to allow the allelopathy just to dissipate before we established wintergreen manures. So on plot 1, we established a multi-species fertility lay that stayed in for the next 2 years. And on plot 2, we established a overwintered crop of Phacelia that we just leave in for the winter before the following crop of onions. So the results. So we were looking for 2 different sets of results here. We were interested in the effectiveness of buckwheat to reduce cooch burden. So as far as that was concerned, while the buckwheat crop was growing, no effect on cooch grass was basically noticed until the buckwheat canopy closed over and shaded out the cooch, at which point the cooch slowed but did not die. After
Andy, just to let you know, there's 1 minute left.
Yeah, lovely, thanks. After the buckwheat was destroyed and worked into the soil, the cooch grass essentially failed to compete with the following green manures on both trial plots. The following season's crops of onions on plot 2 were both fantastic crops of onions in 2019 and 2020. Very different weather patterns in those years as well, with very little problem from cooch. Noticeable large reduction in presence of rhizome too. On plot 1, although harder to assess, is now in 2-year mixed fertility lay. After extensive digging, it's been almost impossible to find any cooch rhizome. Considering plot 1 was scored as 8 out of 10 for cooch both years, this looks like a very positive result. The other thing we were looking to see was we were comparing it against an existing technique, which was essentially a long-term fallow with no crops in the ground. And we knew that this, in theory, was very damaging to soil structure. Now, there's a lot of talk about soil structure at this conference, and I believe there's no better demonstration in the real world. We can talk all the science we want, but as farmers, we know droughts and flooding really show up the quality of your soil structure. So here we have, plain to see, same sowing dates, same crop, the fallow plot, poor germination, poor ground cover, not really a successful wintergreen manure to protect my soil. On the buckwheat plot, that's a lovely, thick crop of Phacelia there, really good coverage, really good germination, lovely colour, much, much better soil structure. Same photos again, same results. You can see the difference in those crops there. And then the following spring, when I ploughed the same plots, it's quite hard to see in these photos, but the one that was fallow, you can see a bit of smearing from the plough. It's a slightly, not such a nice organic-y colour. The buckwheat plot, well, it just fell off the plough. I could have just rolled it and planted straight into it without a power harrow. So it's without a doubt that we all know this, but the actual evidence is green manures, living crops in your soil just give you much, much better soil structure. So my overall conclusions are buckwheat is an effective tool for combating cooch grass. Buckwheat is now a permanent feature of my field scale rotations. The strongest effects must be destroyed and incorporated to the soil. It shouldn't be seen as a silver bullet for cooch grass. It is part of an integrated approach, crucial to constantly outcompete cooch grass with green manure lays and harvested crops. Never give it time to establish. It is, however, a far superior technique to bastard fallow, as effective in all weather conditions and improves soil structure rather than destroys it. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Andy. That was really, really fascinating. We haven't got a huge amount of time left, but there is one question I would like to start with the Q&A for everybody here, and which does involve Andy's talk as well, is all these techniques here are really of interest to people that are keen to reduce the amount of tillage they do or be zero tillage. If we start with you, Andy, somebody put a question in the chat actually. Why didn't you direct drill straight into that buckwheat ploughed field, for example? Are you interested in no-till, and how do you see these techniques? If I start with you first, Andy, how do you see these techniques trying to help make that a reality for people to try and reduce the herbicide use?
So yeah, I'm fascinated. I see all the benefits of no-till, and unfortunately, I'm a veg farmer, which is probably a much bigger challenge for no-till than arable. For lots and lots of reasons. Another problem with which, again, this is, I'm not saying it wouldn't work, but further research would definitely be interesting. I know in the States that buckwheat is used for no-till, where they have guaranteed frosts that can destroy it, basically. So for us, it's in the UK, in the States, you can sow it in the fall, and basically during the winter, it'll get destroyed by frost and just leave you with a lovely, clean seed bed to direct drill into. And long after, this is the key thing for direct drilling into buckwheat, is long after the allelopathy has dissipated. We noticed in the early years of the trial that when we even 2 weeks after destroying the crop, when we drilled for celia, we got very poor germination. So we pushed out the sowing time a bit longer. I am very interested in no-till in veg terms, but it's got a lot further to go than arable has, is what I would say. But always looking to get minimum soil disruption wherever we can.
So Dominic, so from your experience on the arable side in particular, what's your thoughts around these different sort of techniques, these different plants that can try and provide some sort of techniques and solutions to make zero till or reduced till a reality for a lot of farmers?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose, I know it's a hot topic of debate. The session's about weed control, or pest and weed control potentially. So I just thought I'd start maybe with some research that's been done that shows how the weed community can shift depending on the tillage. So conventional till ploughing compared to reducing tillage or no-till. And the really interesting thing is that you don't necessarily get a more benign community one way or the other. You have features of that weed community that are positive and are negative. So when you're reducing tillage or going no-till, you're obviously favouring perennial weeds, but you're also favouring weeds that are less aggressive, they're less nutrient hungry, and they can be shorter, but they also produce a lot more seeds, smaller seeds, so you may increase the weed burden. If you're ploughing, you reduce the amount of perennials, but you can promote more aggressive annuals, more nutrient hungry, and then maybe more competitive, although they tend to be larger seeded, so they don't set as much seed return. So it's not so clear cut that in terms of weed control, that one method is better than another. For sure, there are loads of benefits for being no-till. And all things being equal, trying to reduce tillage is a very positive thing, particularly for organic farmers. There was some work done on a European project, Tillman, that said, maybe the best solution, the compromise for organic farming to reduce tillage would be to try to go with shallow non-inversion. But I think ploughing does provide some services, some ecosystem services. It does control some weeds, it does help mineralize nutrients, and it can help lift soil. And when I was talking about using a diversity of plants, a diversity of approaches, a diversity of management, I think tillage can fit in there too. And there's certainly suggestions that, if you're long-term no-till or you're ploughing out of grassland, that you don't immediately undo the benefits of having not tilled that land for a long time through one use of the plough. So maybe a bit on the fence there. I know the session about no-till and the Holy Grail, maybe, and the kind of claimed you know, climate-friendly nature of it. I think some of the research suggests yes, it's very beneficial for building carbon in the topsoil, but maybe not so much lower down. And obviously, you know, a lot of no-till farms, conservation ag would still be using mineral nitrogen, and there's a lot of energy usage in that, so that's not, you know, as climate friendly. Yeah, so
as always, it's a complex picture, isn't it? So I think what we'd like to do, there's lots of questions and we just don't have enough time in this session, but we will follow up with as many questions as possible with a follow-up article and blog post. And Dominic, those papers that you mentioned just now, it'd be great to be able to include those as well to reference for the audience here. So Andrew as well, in regards to potato growing, what's your view in regards to this trap crop? Because you're at the, you know, your first year of the trial, and as you could hear from Andy, sometimes it can take years of trialing. What's your hunch? Do you think that this has legs, and do you think that it's going to be really important to keep trialing this year on year to see if there are cumulative effects or otherwise, and trying to understand that establishment?
It's trying to understand the crop. The main thing is trying to get it established, and that's our biggest issue with it. Yeah, we need more trial work, and where in the rotation it's got to be best fitted, because the PCN levels are always at the highest straight after a potato crop. So to me, it's like down to government as well. Like elms is coming along. Would we be better off growing a potato crop, not putting a cereal crop in the winter, in the May, like they do in Europe, sow the sticky nightshades, the scabra and the cyst in, and put it in then, and then, so we get, if we can get 75% reduction at the highest level, we've already reduced it, and then the natural rotation will reduce it even further. So that's the best point to put it. It's working out, it's the establishing it is going to be the issue, and without jeopardizing the farm. And we've a lot to learn. This doesn't just work on potatoes. We could also be finding, there was an article in the press of the week about stem nematodes in beans. Now, there's work there. This could go throughout a lot of crops, but we don't know. There's a lot of research still to do, and it's where to go.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. And Becky, we're very short on time, but is there a question that's sort of been voted top for the panel that we just have enough time to quickly ask?
So in terms of probably the big question also is an indication of the cost benefit of using allelopathic plants or trap crops, and I wonder if any farmers would like to comment on that. Andy or Andrew?
Yeah, I'll comment on that. So yeah, I mean, like I said, from my perspective, cost benefits. So I haven't even mentioned some of the benefits of buckwheat. I mean, buckwheat is the most incredible crop for attracting predatory insects and pollinators onto your farm. You know, and for me, it's solving in one subject. It's got multiple benefits. You know, it's improving my soil structure. It's dealing with a weed problem, and it's bringing in predatory insects. So basically, it's also scavenging phosphate and making it available to my crop. So I'm an organic farmer, but if I was a conventional farmer, that would be dropping my bill for phosphate, mineral phosphate being brought onto the land. It would be dropping my bill for insect pesticides being used because the predatory insects it's bringing in, and it's increasing the yield of the follow-on crop of onions. I mean, like, from whichever way I look at it, it's far outweighing the cost of that buckwheat seed, the benefits it's bringing to my growing operation.
And Andrew, and the costs involved in establishing this crop, do you think it's something that could, once the establishment's worked out, that's something that could be economically viable?
Yeah, it's the seed at the moment is very expensive, but it's moment we've lost Vidate. That was a chemical that could control PCN. We are going to lose more. The more we can learn, and very last resort wants to be go for the can. If we can do it naturally, better off. We grow the hardy mix, which is oil radish and mustard and a bit of rocket. And people say, how do you quantify it? The cost of doing it. Well, if you come here in the spring, some of the presentations I've done, you can see exactly what it is. It's that soil is more pliable. It's as much of the organic matter, the predatory pests that have come in. It all helps. And the more I learn, the more I realise we've a lot more to learn. But I like to say what Andy said before about constantly working the fields. One of the sayings I got told, I think it come from America, the more you work land, the more land requires working. And it's all down to that same thing. And you just wreck the structure by the more you work it. We can get away with less cultivations with these cover crops and trap crops we're going to start putting into the ground, because they're trapping the nutrients, fetching the predatory pests in, and giving us a more pliable soil. And then with the rainfalls we get, it helps.
Brilliant. We've overrun by 3 minutes, but it was really worth asking that cost benefit question, because that's often what it can boil down to for people. But I'm so sorry we couldn't cover everybody's questions today. As I said before, we will, we've got all these questions recorded in Mentimeter, and we'll also take a copy of the chat. Becky, if you could please do that now, that would be wonderful. And it just leaves me to thank you so much to our audience that all joined us. And thank you very much to Andrew, Dominic and Andy. It's been really fascinating hearing your trials. Dan Isles has put a load of links in the chat of all for a bit more information on all the projects that have been talked about today, and some other field lab examples as well. And so thanks again for your time. I'm sure everybody's ready for their tea, but it's been really, really interesting. And thanks to Dan from ORFC, who's helped support us, and Dan Isles on the chat, and Becky Swin as well, who's our network coordinator for Innovative Farmers. So thanks very much from me. I'm Kate Presland. I'm the Programme Manager of Innovative Farmers, and please do get in touch if you have any further questions about any of the trials. We'd be more than happy to give you more information. So thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference. There's so many sessions to get through. But thanks again to our speakers, and have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all.